telling stories about human intelligence based on the masterpiece concept of strike. Masterpiece concept of strike. The Intelligent Show. The beautiful forever intelligent show.
Hey, if you are joining us live, we want to go ahead and say a big thank you. And we have a lot to cover today on the Forever Intelligent Conversation, and we are particularly excited that we last week we had a phenomenal readers engagement with a lot of people. So for those of you who are joining us today, we encourage you. Our readers engagement is predominantly online every month, and then the annual event is in person in Denver in the United States. So it is not something that you can be isolated from. So if you want to join the conversation online regularly, obviously go down to the website rolling on your screen and maybe just sign up, and then obviously you'll get some feeds and some information coming to you about the readers engagement. I particularly like the readers engagement because the readers engagement is where we sit and have some really interesting conversation with a lot of people. But today we have a lot to cover, and I wanted to go ahead and just talk to you a little bit about the things we are going to be looking at today, and just share with you the rundown so that you know what we cover in here, and then you start connecting the community for everybody to come and join us live. There's a lot of conversation we are going to have today, and we're going to have shortly on our screen just everything that we are going to be covering today, so that you can take a look at that with us, right? So let's see what we're covering today. And this is particularly important for organizing our conversation and making sure that we are following time and schedule and leading the debates in a very critical and important way. So I think on the first segment of our conversation, we should be, this conversation is a 45 minutes conversation, and then we have a little break. So buying finished goods at higher prices than you need to. So we will talk a lot about that. And then on our second segment, which is absolutely a blast today, we will talk about youth, drugs, and education reforms. Critical is also focused on the Republic of Liberia. So we want to say thank you to all of you who work in the background to help us work on production and all the other different issues. We are going to kickstart our conversation here shortly on our first topic, and we want all of you to come along with us here in this discussion. All right. So again, for those of you who have never watched the Forever Intelligent Conversation, this is where we share the world's most compelling stories about human intelligence based on the masterpiece concept of strike. And I'm your host of this conversation. We have had the opportunity to be here for the last 3 years leading this conversation. So we want to thank all of you who are joining us right now, who are watching, who are engaging, and who are sharing the broadcast. Let's begin today's conversation by looking at a number of issues, right? So the first place we wanted to start, like we said, we want to talk a little bit about jobs creation in the mining sector. So historically, the Liberian economy has been heavily reliant on the enclave sector. This is probably redundant, mineral extraction and all of those sort of stuff. And why it is the education system that has powered the desire for manufacturing and development around the world, the reverse has been true because the education system itself, it's built on theory and practice. So if you went to school and did something in development economics, or you did industrial analysis in development economics, or you did manufacturing in development economics, you can read all of the theory, but if you don't get them, has suffered severe systemic shock from years of prolonged, civil crisis that we have dealt with. Today, our mining sector is undergoing massive transformation. We have to admit to that. There are strives, there are things that are happening that have been made to ensure that the mining sector itself is not just remaining something that is not being transformed. So the mining sector has been undergoing massive transformation, and there is this projection of 3 billion projected investment that's taking place right now as of the 2025 statistics that we had under the new government. The fast tracking of a new mining code is also taking place because the government wants to ensure that Liberia can transition from becoming a passive royalty collector in the mining sector to becoming a national shareholder. So the establishment of the National Mining Company of Liberia, which is going to focus on transitioning the ownership of our domestic resources, especially in our mining sector, iron ore and gold, from just 10% to 25% push in that modernization. These things are critical. And this also ties in to the education system. Okay. So that establishment of the Liberia National Mining Company, it's going to capture equity and then move the country from becoming a mere spectator in our own national resources to becoming a real national shareholder and a player in our economy. And then concurrently, we have the Ministry of Education under a strategic agenda working with UNICEF to sign this 2026 to 2030 education work plan. We'll highlight some of the details and things that are needed that are critical for the education sector transformation. And also the government through that work plan is tackling infrastructure deficit and working to at least, build 100 more schools, implementing teachers training to be able to deal with building and increasing our literacy and national productivity through the education system. So these are critical things that we are going to look at today. But if you're just joining us, we want to say welcome to the Forever Intelligent Conversation. We will appreciate where you to connect the community to this conversation, because like we say, this is where we share some of the world's most compelling stories about human intelligence based on the masterpiece concept of Shrike. And we are particularly excited that today's conversation is going to be absolutely focused on leading conversations about true empowerment and critical discussion on the national development discourse. So to begin looking at the mining sector analysis, one thing we wanted to basically highlight for you all here is that this is key. For generations, Liberia has been a textbook example of national resources mismanagement. Let's put it that way. For generations, our country has been a textbook example for how countries mismanage and misuse the national resources. And people have been asking how to fix this, but today, this is where we appreciate digital expansion, knowledge expansion, so that people begin to understand what's happening. The inherent approach to how we've led development, even though Liberia was not a country that was originally colonized Liberia still adopted the colonial approach to development. And this is where most people will be asking some questions about, the Republic of Liberia. Say, but wait, this is Africa's oldest independent republic. This is the only country that was not colonized by some European nation. But the country current trade and infrastructure, business and economic development is modeled predominantly after the colonial system, the colonial rule. So what is the fundamental focus of the colonial system or the colonial rule that we're talking about today? The fundamental focus of the colonial system and the colonial rule is that those artificial boundaries that were drawn on the continent were drawn basically for the export of raw materials outside of Africa. And even though Liberia was not colonized, Liberia has adopted that approach to development. The country has not been focused on creating domestic value chain to increase productivity and raise the level of national development from just extraction of raw material to basically local capacity development and mobilization of local resources and increase in national development. So many people have asked this question. They're like, but what happened? Since Liberia was not colonized, how did Liberia also adopt this colonial rule approach to economic development? That is critical. It is not a conversation a lot of people are having, and we could continue to see it. But if we continue to lay the foundation for this conversation here, for many of you who are watching, is like, let's go back here. Also, many generations have watched trains carry high-grade iron ore away from the mountains of Yekepa in Nimba County, right down, okay, to the rails and the lines of the port in Bikano, exported out of Liberia. We've watched this for centuries. Okay, wealth flowed out of the country. But what comes back to our community? What comes back to our local community? You can look at our historical books, right? Years of civil war. We know we've had that, and we continue to tell people that this is no longer an excuse. Years of civil unrest left the country basically with a broken infrastructure system. Everything was disrupted. But we show you that there are African countries now who also went through 15 years of civil unrest, went through 20 years of civil unrest. In 15, 20 years, they've moved past Liberia and leading real development. Okay? So we understand decades of civil conflict disrupted our national infrastructure and stripped away our economic, social, as an infinite cash register. It is absolutely bound to not develop. When you treat your mineral as a cash register and your education system has been developed in a way that it is an afterthought rather than a proactive initiative, what is happening? That country doesn't create wealth. That country becomes a spectator in its own wealth operation process. So today, what we see in Liberia, and this is particularly important for a conversation that we are going to have on some of our other forever intelligent conversation here. What is happening is that under the current approach to development that we as a country adopted from where, I don't know, even though we were not colonized, we creating what we call an very empty enclave economy that is dependent entirely on foreign expatriate. And the reason for this, because our own people have never been given the tools to engineer their own destiny. I have had a fundamental problem with this for a long time. And the forever intelligent conversation sometimes too, where I sit, because the reason why it is constrained, it is challenging to be on this conversation is because on this conversation, there are a lot of fact check taking place. So we are basically not allowed to just discuss politics entirely. We have to discuss facts, critical development conversation beyond politics. And this is why, as you joining us today, we want to encourage you to continue to connect other people to this platform, because as much as I engage in politics, I believe that the national course of development must focus on professionalism in a way that is critical to development outside of politics. So giving you that highlight, we're talking about it, okay? And it is important. Under the jobs creation and mining sector, we have to be able to see this. This is another important point we wanted to highlight for those of you who are watching. And we see a lot of people are joining right now on Twitch, on Twitter, and everywhere. Please, if you are on Facebook Live, also do us the same thing on Facebook Live. Connect someone to the conversation if you are on Facebook Live. Look, Liberia's mining sector, primarily driven by iron ore and gold, serve as an unstable yet critical economic player. It's a critical economic engine for growth. This sector has contributed approximately 10 to 25% of our nation's GDP annually for years now. We can go back and check the statistics, how long it's been in that range, but it's contributed 10% to 25%. Now, for many people who will be wondering about those percentages, and you will just be thinking like, okay, what does this mean? Right now, our national entire public education spending, the percentage of our entire public education spending on our GDP is 2.3 to 2.6%. So if you convert that by looking at the annual allocation just in a recent 2026 2027 education spending budget that's moving through, I think the government allocated probably $134 million to spend on public education, and that is about 2.4% of our current GDP. The mining sector, we telling you here, has been contributing 10 to 25% of our GDP annually. Think about how important this sector is. Like we say to you, the Forever Intelligent Conversation is where we break down the analysis for you in a way that is absolutely different. And moving through this conversation reminds me of a lot of different things, okay? Because sometimes when we transition, when you leave places and you move on, people start to wonder, okay? And focusing on the mining sector again, what we wanted to highlight with you is that, look, even though the mining sector has been predominantly unstable, it's been a critical engine for our economic growth and development, contributing 10 to 25% of the nation's annual GDP. Now, why the sector has sparked, right? Like there's been some improvement in its activities due to recent economic rebounds. There was also like a 17% surge in mining output in Liberia. As you know, Asila Metal and other companies have been experiencing some favorable market climate on the international stage. So part of the 200 million signing bonus that was received by the Liberian government from Asila Metal was basically part of those favorable international market trends that Asila Metal look at and say, okay, we can be able to add this to the national budget. Even though some of us sit and we can have more critical analysis of that 200 million by saying, okay, another perspective could be arguing for increasing value of the country, increasing the signature fee, shortening the length of the contract and creating an opportunity for competitive engagement from other competitors, but at the same time injecting in a system or a style that requires us to build local capacity. These are things we can look at. Now, the 17% surge that we're just talking about boosted industrial performance. Now, it's stability basically. The mining sector stability basically, it's like not something that you can be fully confident of, because the stability of the mining sector, especially the gold and iron ore, they've been seriously undermined by global price fluctuations. And since Liberia is heavily an export-based economy, rather than some type of heavy industrial nation, the fluctuation in these prices can impact how operations are ongoing in our mining sector. But beyond that, just the fluctuation in global prices are another side. So another thing you have to look at too is, despite the high headlines in GDP contributions and other stuff, the sector actual national development has been seriously blunted by other things like tax evasion, underreporting, corruption, and illicit financial flows. These things are actually positioned to cost the Liberian government millions of dollars. People will need to lead in these sectors and be able to go and not only focus on creating absolute system and performance engagement to realize something outside for our people's benefit, but to also look at the sustainability and the long-term approach to maintaining those systems. Okay, these are absolutely important. The other thing that we wanted to highlight here is that, so right now, under the mining sector, right? While we're still in the mining sector, this first segment is the whole mining sector that we delivering into. And if you're watching the conversation, like we said, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere you're watching us from, please go ahead, do us a favor. Connect the community, connect people to get involved and watch the conversation. Don't watch the conversation alone. All right. So the government of Liberia right now, through the Ministry of Mines and Energy, is fast tracking and updating the mining code. And there are new developments that should be taking place across the sector through this fast tracking and updating development process. And I think the establishment of the National Oil Company of Liberia, which basically is scheduled to move the country acts from that 10% to about 25% ownership, that should position the country from becoming a mere passive royalty collector to be a shareholder in a critical sector in our economy. You have to be able to sit down and ask yourself some questions. This is an important time in the country history for people to get together and look at what is going to be the functioning capability of the Liberia National Mining Company. Especially if you think about the fact that this sector right now, giving you 25% of national GDP, is not a sector to joke with. It's an absolutely important sector. We've been mining our gold and iron ore for centuries. And the realization of the benefit has been the greatest challenge. So what happened is that you have to be able to take a look at this from a different perspective now, because for centuries, what we did, we operated our mining sector under the mentality of passive royalty collector. Just go ahead and hand out Class A or Class B license. Sit back and collect royalty check when foreign conglomerates are making billions. Could influence the entire trajectory of Liberia for generations to come. For example, just by demanding a 25% free carried equity, the state is actually now saying we no longer just want to be landlords and collecting rent. Why you play in our house, play on our natural resources. Okay? We want to be shareholders, leading this process and making sure that we're detecting how change is happening. Now, if multidimensional companies can profit off the wealth beneath Liberian soil, the Liberian people must directly share in those dividends. This is absolutely important. This is absolutely important. And for the many of you who may be wondering why, it's simply because generations will come and go, this wealth will remain, but it is the priority of government to ensure that you are laying the foundation for your citizens to be reaching the Human Development Index in a way that is rapid, absolutely massive. Now, just from a regular academic term, when economists look at developing nations, they're looking at what? GDP growth, foreign direct investment, they look at foreign account balances and all those other stuff. But the Human Development Index will look at things like life expectancy, years of quality schooling. Okay, those are critical issues. Life expectancy, years of quality schooling, standard of living. Very important. And this is based on how many of the citizens are doing this. So if you're just joining us again, we wanted to say thank you and welcome to the beautiful Forever Intelligent Conversation. This is what we are discussing for those of you who may just be joining us for the first time. This is what we are discussing. We are looking at the Liberia's mining sector review, focus on job creation. We've led a conversation on that, and we've covered a lot of different issues here on that sector. Intelligent conversation. Thank you. All right, thank you and welcome back to the Forever Intelligent Conversation. This is where we share the world's most compelling stories about human intelligence based on the masterpiece concept of strike. And today we've been leading a conversation on jobs creation and the Liberia mining sector, and now it's time for us to focus on education reforms, linking that to youth drugs and other national issue. And where we wanted to begin this conversation basically is to first of all just look at the state of affairs in Liberia today. It is absolutely important to admit that in every sector, the country is crying for real leadership. In almost every sector, the country is crying for real leadership. People are looking out for an absolutely new direction, for someone, some system, ideas to step up and create massive opportunity or hope for the country. And this is evident by the very fact of what we'll be analyzing here today on a lot of things, from the drug challenges, youth unemployment, education challenges and possibly education reforms that we'll also be talking about. These things have absolutely been in existence for a long, long time. And sometimes when we lead this conversation, it's just because very often we are in heavily charged political forum. We don't often have the opportunity to lay out critical discussion without people just thinking we are being heavily political. Sometimes this is why I love the Forever Intelligent conversation, because I have the chance to sit here, especially sometimes with a lot of different intelligent guests who come on board, and people know the way you come as a guest on the Forever Intelligent conversation is that you fill out a form, you follow rules, the very least we ask of people here is, don't come here and say anything that is not the truth. There's so many lies in the world that you can share everywhere and other places that you want to share that. But on this platform, we are helping to give people some level of consciousness, and we're empowering them with messages that are based on proven facts, things that are the truth. That's what we focus on. The truth can be for or against government, but it has to be the truth. You're not exaggerating anything. You're focusing on the reality. And beginning on this conversation of the drug situation and everything, I share with a lot of people on other episodes that as long as drugs continue to remain illegal in our country, the idea of rehabilitation for our next generation, empowering our next generation for the labor force, rehabilitating these people, it's not charity. Nobody, no government official should see it as a charity. Now, charity organizations can see that as a charitable operations that they can undertake, but for the government, you can build the next generation of leaders to compete competitively in a labor force when these people are drowning in drugs. And some statistics we'll share here today that are particularly important for us to analyze with the situation that's happening. Look, the Liberian labor force is aging, and unemployment is high, and we're talking about formal employment here. That's the reverse analysis for why unemployment is high. Secondly, people who are formally employed are not seeing any massive increase in their wages. National productivity is either stagnant or worsening, and it is tied in to a whole system of development that is focused on the education sector. But here's the beginning of this conversation. If the education system or whatever other system, but today particularly, let's just look at it as the education system. If the administrative architecture is broken, like we know it is in the Liberia's education system, there's no quick fix without the review of critical data. On the Forever Intelligent conversation, a lot of people ask the question, but we said this before. We said to people, we said, look, there is a way you can have a national and professional development conversation without politics. You can lead a professional development conversation without politics. And people have been asking me a lot of times, they're like, Daniel, the political system is so polarized that people are unable to lead without injecting politics into our leadership system. And I have seen this because I'm not one of those who just left Liberia, came on the international stage, and practically had no experience in the traditional challenges of our country. When we were deeply involved in advocacy several years ago, what we used to say is the bread and butter issues of our nation. That used to be the conversation, the bread and butter issues of our nation. And sadly, 15, 20 years later, the bread and butter issues of our nation has only been stagnating or worsening. I have come to realize that it is time for the Liberian people to look at their own development and own it. Political parties are not limited, and the reason why political parties are limited because the country has a leadership gap. And like I said, today we're going to give you some statistics, critical statistics that you would not easily hear about or see from other political leaders or other people. And one of the benefits that I have been able to have is that I'm not only being in politics in Liberia, but I'm also an author. And we go through critical peer reviews. And I can tell you this for sure. When people run around and just talk about massive debate, massive, intellectualism, all this stuff, sometimes what you need to go through is to be able to have critical peer reviews. Critical peer reviews. And before I continue on this conversation, this is something that I wanted to share with you. When I say critical peer reviews, I remember before I wrote this book, for those of you who know, I'm an author now. We've written and published 3 books, gone worldwide for people to read. This one is being taught in universities in the United States. Before I wrote this book, for managing inherent technical isolation, we had a number of peer reviews. We had people looking at it, critiquing the context, the structure, the appeal, and the message. This was very important. This was important because you cannot produce a work that is going to be placed to impact and transform the lives of other people here in the United States or anywhere in the world that has not gone through serious scrutiny or critical peer review. As I say this to people sometimes, I say, look, in Liberia, we complain a lot that politics will overshadow everything. But there is a system we can set. And that system itself is so beautiful, it's so intelligent, that the system itself naturally drives away politics and focuses on real development. And we talk about it here. And I will just talk about the steps. I will not go in depth into the system that we've shared. Because when people are asking all the question here, anything you try to do, predominantly, you are going to struggle because politics takes clearly. That has to be defined. Step 2, if you're trying to achieve something, you have a system and you have people running the system. So what has to happen is that since you know what you're trying to achieve, your layer 2 will be determine what are the system inefficiencies. If you determine the system challenges, what you want to do, you link the systemic challenges to individual performances. That does not mean that you're hurting anybody. In the process of public development, we link systemic challenges to individual performances. And then obviously, when you have those individual performances that are being identified that are resulting to poor output in the system, you determine the means for either improving holistic systemic capacity or building individual capacity. With this, you don't get criticized for being someone who basically is just reacting because you hate people. Guys, we have a lot of you now on Facebook. People are on Facebook even more than on Twitter now. So if you're on Facebook, don't forget to be sharing the conversation. Please do that and bring someone else. But so here's the point, right? And so this is what I was just saying initially. I said if a system administrative architecture is broken, there's no quick fix without the critical review of national data. Now, when you follow the systemic steps we just explained, define what is required, analyze the people and the systemic productivity, link systemic output that are poor enough to individual performance, determine the way that you can remedy systemic and individual challenges, and obviously in the future you look for means to improve that. If you create that, that is critical. This is why structural reforms are particularly important in our education system, okay, especially for supporting the steps that we just elaborated on. For example, think about the recently launched 2025-2026 annual school census in Liberia. We're doing a school census to be able to collect data and to be able to tackle infrastructure deficit, teachers training challenges, poor instruction, and other lapses around general classroom management at a professional level. All these data must be collected. It's not always about the education system is broken, the education system is damaged. People have to discuss specific things that are required to improve the education system. And this is where some politicians are limited. Because most of the time when I listen to people, this is why you have to come to our education town hall that is happening online on the 27th of this month. Come to the education town hall. We've posted the links, we've posted all the stuff, register. Politicians in Liberia don't solve any problem because they don't have a way to deal with issues systematically. They deal with issues from the patronage system and always say the education system is broken, the economic system is poor. No. I told somebody the other day, if I wanted to start discussing the Liberian economy, I'll be able to move into specific issues that include things like, look, if we discipline ourselves and achieve strategic objectives out of our fiscal discipline, the country should spend on education, right? That's what we are spending right now. So I will tell you economically, as a leader, what I will be sitting down looking at is, instead of just going to take foreign loan, I will be calling the finance minister and be asking him, look, there are some lapses in our fiscal trajectory, and the negative projected balances are impacting the economy in a negative way. How do we address the waste so that the waste we have here can be transferred to other things like economic, education, or other social productivity in our country? You don't see Liberian politicians having conversations like this. And it is a big problem for the country, because after years of struggle and we into post-war development and we facing a challenge in this country where the educational brain drain has also impacted what we should do, yes, but it's not an excuse for how we should lead development. It's not an excuse. So it's time people start to rethink how we approach development. Like I said, you can take that, okay? But for years, our education planning was filled with operational inefficiencies. We didn't have even things like student to teacher ratios, ghost teachers on payrolls, and then we have predominantly not fully qualified people teaching our children. And some critical statistics will come here that I know, people who, when these guys help with some of my research and stuff like that before we get on live to talk, because some people know that on the Forever Intelligent Conversation, we are not going to be sparing a chance to say anything that is not true or to have a fake conversation. This is where you want to come and listen to real critical and factual statistics. If you weren't here from the first segment of this show, we deliver a lot on the mining sector, job creation, and what is required to improve the sector. And we're working now on education, youth, drugs, and focusing on some of the reforms that should be done here. All right. So look at this. This is absolutely important for this conversation today, right? Now, by deploying simple stuff like digital data tracking at district levels, the Ministry of Education can enforce cultural accountability. They can also improve professionalism and they can increase educational productivity. These things are required, but the government will have to increase its spending into in a reasonable way to meet these type of aggressive operational needs. A country cannot be boasting of transforming its labor force if you're not heavily investing in critical education and research and development initiatives. These are critical. And this is why this year and beyond, we're changing the conversation in Liberian politics. We change the conversation in Liberian politics. Nobody will just be sitting down here and just be talking about our senator and our representative can come and buy us rice and give us food to eat. Okay? Nobody. We shouldn't be looking at this just in that aspect. We are basically going to ensure that it has to be a situation where here is the value chain analysis. We have to be able to create opportunities so that young people develop the skill set so that they can contribute value, and then the value can be rewarded with payments. This is called jobs. Okay? This is called jobs. And when we're being specific on these issues is just because we cannot consistently continue to play into the patronage system. This is how we must lead and make a difference. And people have been so polarized, people have been so programmed that when you're having data-driven conversation, you leading an analysis. You look, one thing I'll say, even while at the University of Liberia or while going to high school in Liberia, I never rushed to speak. I was always the guy who would sit back, do critical analysis, and give different perspective on my position. That's the person I represented. That's the image I carry. That's the person that I was. This is why you don't just see me wake up and just start talking on issues. Okay? Because I know that we live in a society, the gullibility, the vulnerability, and all the different issues has positioned us to feel like we should talk on everything and anything in any way and anyhow. And that is absolutely not called for. A lot of my friends that I know today, and even my lawyers in Liberia, there's one conversation that we always distributed that no, I have been consistently pushing for intellectual and economic independence of our people, because I've always said this. I said if we created a system where even more than half of our population became economically independent, intellectually independent, not dependent on politicians to say this man has to give me something for me to talk for him, that person has to give me something, but people use critical thinking to adapt and follow policies. Many of the politicians we have in our system today who are at the top will not survive in that kind of system. And this will cut across the sector. The way journalists report in our country, the way people engage the media, all of that will change. Okay? All of that will change. Somebody was putting a comment on Facebook and they just share it to me. But we are not discussing the economy today. We discuss the mining sector and we discuss the education, youth, and drug challenges. I don't know where somebody is coming from. If you want economic conversation, you should come. We even have economic contributors here who work in the background to submit a lot of stuff. If you want high level economic analysis, you should be able to come to the show every Saturday and be here, my friend. We appreciate you coming, okay? But we're on economic discussion today. So I'm seeing that comment just so we can get on that. So just to continue on what we were sharing here under the education sector, what happened is that beyond the cultural accountability and improving professionalism through the district level data tracking on our schools, what can also happen? Oh yeah, see. What can also happen is that look, we must be able to build the system to also transition from theory to practice. This is absolutely important. Our students need to focus on having the science and technology labs that they can use to analyze things like plant and animal cells rather than just reading these things in the biology notebook. Okay, they should be able to track. Yeah, we'll definitely start seeing some of those transformation. Okay, so one of the few things that we left out that we're going to finalize here, and this is what a lot of people were actually hoping for, and this is the last segment here that we're going to lead on, is talk about some critical data. Talk about some critical data, right? Like when I say if you in politics in Liberia, or wherever you are, one of the most beautiful things you can do for yourself is build your agenda on facts. You see, facts are hard to sell. When people spewing falsehood, controversies, and these things, they try to make people. But when you build your principles around focusing on the facts, it takes time to get to the actual facts. But those are the things you want to be about. That's the image you want to project for yourself. That's how you want to represent yourself, So I remember back in August of 2013 when Madam Salif said the education system was a mess. And for many of the people who knew, this was a big debate because we had a situation then in the country where I think more than 20,000 students from high school had taken the university entrance and they failed the university entrance. And people were asking, what's going on in our education system? And the then president came up and she said this education system is just a mess, right? And beyond the mess statement, there were systemic issues that we all needed to follow up on. But how many of us today are still sitting there analyzing? I don't know. 2013 was how many years ago? 2013, it's been more than a decade, right? But look at what happened. We had like under 2% of our high school seniors out of almost 50,000 plus students who took the West African senior certification examination. We have under 2%. So over a decade after we talk about our education system being a mess, the declaration itself now is holding to the fact that functional literacy is a big challenge in our country. Foundational numeracy and literacy skills are a big challenge. And people started laughing just quite recently when the AFL was recruiting people and people could not read simple big stuff on papers. And people asking where this is coming from. People looking at the holistic statistics. It's not when you went to school and you were good enough. It's people looking at overall. How many of the citizens are capable of doing this? So despite years of investment in literacy, in education. Our literacy rate remains critically low when compared to even the sub-Saharan average or neighboring average right over there, suggesting that physical construction of schools has not translated into intellectual capital in the country. And these are some of the statistics that we were going to talk about here today. Adult literacy right now, those 15 years and older in our country, the recent data from UNESCO and UNDP and other places still put that at like around 48%. So almost half of the population can read or write or construct meaningful sentences. In that group, the predominantly disadvantaged population, that ages 15 to 24, represent almost 50% of our illiterate people in the country. And people are asking, what is the generation we're going to set aside to be a golden generation, a productive labor force, the group that will transform Liberia? When? In 2030? In 2050? How? With these current statistics. One of the ones that I've looked at for years, it's been staggering between 10 and 20%. And quite recent, you can really read and write. And then that means the children are attending school, but they're learning nothing. Because I think one of the fundamental requirements for graduating from high school is that you should just be able to read and write. Okay. And I know for sure the Forever Intelligent conversation is so heated, is so action packed that very often, sometimes when we sit and we're leading this conversation, it becomes absolutely difficult for us to even catch up on time. But we wanted to say thank you to all of you who joined us today. I'm grateful. I've been your host out here for 3 years running. We'll look forward to see you again on the Forever Intelligent conversation next weekend. And until then, please remember, stay engaged, keep engaged, continue to work to lead transformation. We'll see you again next weekend. Thank you for joining the broadcast today.